Sure. I'm also in the link to the first source sheet in the chat. I'll also share screen. Let me go through the stuff. But yeah, so we're doing the Siman Sameh. I will be doing the whole thing because sadly Joel cannot be with us. So he gave us an excellent source sheet to work off of. So yeah, so we'll get started in a sec, but I want to, like, before we get into it, like, have just a couple overarching like questions that we're thinking about throughout the material. I think the Siman is structured very interestingly in that it starts off with the like the like what that looks like, what this kind of rejoicing, what forms that should take, and then we have like, but also don't get too happy because you need to remember Jerusalem. And you need to mourn. And then we kind of go back into the simcha for a second at the very end and are like, and also it's really important to like misamecha kala. And so that even takes precedence over dead people. But I think that there's a big kind of push and pull throughout the sources between this emphasis on like joy and celebration or whatever, and also being like, but be careful that that celebration doesn't get like too out of hand, like too rowdy, or that like that kind of like holy celebration doesn't take on sort of like a non-holy form. And so I think it's something to keep in mind throughout our Siman. Also the idea of to what extent we're talking about what individuals need to be doing versus like what sort of the communal responsibility is for creating a certain atmosphere and how we experience that. Yeah, I think, oh, and the last thing is what like the authorities and the poskim are saying is and isn't appropriate and good versus like what people are actually doing, is an interesting thing to keep in mind with these questions. So with that being said, I think I will share my screen. Okay, can people see that? Does it be zoomed in? Okay. So I think we're gonna start off with this Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer, just kind of a nice background to the precedence that we give this mitzvah, that like even Hashem and the Malachim do it. So Asher, would you be able to read the Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer?
Sure. 10 חופות עשה הקדוש ברוך הוא לאדם הראשון בגן עדן, וכולם של אבנים טובות ומרגליות ושל זהב. Should I stop translation or keep going?
Sure.
The Holy One, blessed be He, made 10 chupot for Adam in Gan Eden, and all of them were with precious stones, and I think margoliot is pearls, if I'm not mistaken, and gold. But isn't it true that for a chatan we only do one chuppah? And for king we do 3. But in order to show his wonderful respect for Adam HaRishon, Hashem made him 10 of them in Gan Eden, as it is said in Yechezkel, Be'eden Gan Elohim, Ha'ita kol even yikara. It was in Gan Eden that I'm trying to wait. I think you Hashem were in Gan Eden with every precious stone. הרי אלו 10 חופות והיו המלאכים מתופפים בתופים ומרקדים כנקבות שנאמר מלאכת תופיך ונקבך בך. And I lost my place. הרי אלו 10 חופות, these 10 חופות, for these 10 chupot, the malachim were all banging on their drums and they were dancing like women, as it is also said in Yechezkel, Melechet tupechon kavecha bach, the workmanship of your drums and your, it's not Melachot Kinekevot. They were dancing with pipes.
Yeah, so
the workmanship of your drums and your pipes is within you.
Yeah, I think that the Kinnikevot here would probably be Binnikevot, as in like that they were like dancing and they were like playing with like pipes. Both like at first the Kinnikevot does seem like it's saying they were dancing like women, which would be just an interesting thing for the Midrash to note. But two things that seem to make that not what it's saying. One, the context of the pasuk from Yechezkel, where the Kinnikevot is talking either about pipes or about the way something was formed. And also, just an interesting fact that was pointed out to me recently is that the way the different roots for dancing are usually used in Tanakh, machal is usually what's used like machol for women dancing, which was the like circle dancing, and rikud was usually referring to dancing that at the time was considered typically what men did, which is more like the jumping, flailing individual, whatever. So they would presumably not be mirakdin kinikevot because dafka, that's more of a masculine form of dancing. But in any case, even the Malachim were dancing and playing music for Adam Harishon and Chava. Okay, so this next bit in Ketubot, it's quoted like directly throughout the sources.
I'm not sure that's for Adam and Chava. I think that's specifically for Adam. Like, I don't think it's a wedding chuppah. I think it's a chuppah as a thing of honor, which we do for both a chatan and kala, and we do for a king in general, and God did for Adam.
So my only reason that I think it is for Adam and Chava is because they talk in the next, in that context in Pirkei HaEzer, they talk about like the wedding canopy and the ways and like the things that HaKadosh Baruch Hu did vis-a-vis Chava and Adam. Also like the classic midrash about like how Hashem like braided Chava's hair and then like brought her to Adam and things like that. So I think within context, I do think it's talking about Adam and Chava, and I think it's specifically mentioning Adam Harishon because he's considered to be the one that HaKadosh Baruch Hu was giving precedence to. But yeah, I do also like the idea of it just being, something they're doing to honor them. But this is something that's referenced in some of the sources as an example of Misameach Chatani Makala. Which again, I think comes largely from it being situated between other midrashim talking about Adam and Chava's wedding, as it were. Okay, so now we have this bit in Ketubot, which is pretty much the main foundational Gemara for the Seif. And so, Alan, do you feel good reading from Tani Rabbanan?
Sure. Tani Rabbanan. כיצד מרקדין לפני הכלה? בית שמאי אומרים כלה כמות שהיא, ובית הלל אומרים כלה נאה וחסודה. אמר להם בית שמאי לבית הלל, הרי שהייתה חיגרת או סומה, אומרים לה כלה נאה וחסודה, והתורה אמרה מדבר שקר תרחק. אמרו להם בית הלל לבית שמאי, לדבריכם מי שלקח מן השוק ישפכנו בעיניו. או יגננו בעיניו, הווי אומר, ישפכנו בעיניו. מכאן אמרו חכמים, לעולם תהא דעתו של אדם מעורבת עם הבריות. Keep going.
Translate up to there.
אמרו לה, sure. So the rabbis asked in the Breita, how do Merakid, we're going to see the different translations, but let's say dance before the Kala. And Shammai says, Kala kamoshihi, the Kala as she is. Beit Hillel says, Kala, this wonderful and graceful bride. Beit Shammai said to Beit Hillel, if she's lame or blind, you're going to say what a beautiful and graceful bride she is. But doesn't the Torah tell us that you stay far away from a false matter? Beit Hillel says, according to your opinion, take someone who buys a bad purchase from the shuk. Are you going to praise them or in their eyes, or are you going to denigrate it in his eyes? So you've got to say you praise it, and therefore the Chacham, based on that, the Chachamim say a person's intention should always be intermingled with the rest of creation.
Right. So this is another point that I think the Taz that we're going to look at talks about this a bit, but there's an interesting tension again between like outright lying versus like selective truth telling or praise giving in service of the mood of the day. So yeah, continue with Amrullah.
Right, but Taz's reading was so crazy, and yet I was like half convinced that it was actually shot. Okay. Amr Alav al Rabbi Yehuda bar Eli sheyonatel bad shel hadas u'meraked lifnei hakala v'omer kalan ava chasuda. Rav Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak meraked atla and atla. Amar Rav Zira machsif lan zava kinach nashe yifsik amudadunara ben dide lekule alma. Ugmiri de lo yifsik amudadunara ella I lechad bidara I letre bidara. Okay, so they said about Rabbi Yehuda bar Eli, he would take a myrtle branch and dance around with it before the kala, and say that how beautiful and graceful she was. Rav Shmuel bar Nachman bar Yitzchak would dance triple juggling, and Rabbi Zera said, "You're embarrassing us, Ava." And when Rabbi Yitzchak died, this pillar of fire went up between him and everyone else, and we learn that this only happens once or twice in a generation.
Right. So our presumption being that this was, meant to be like, it's interesting because the whole like you're embarrassing us sort of thing. And if you look at Rashi, he's like that, he's like that it was kind of like denigrating the honor of Talmidei Chachamim by him doing this kind of like silly stuff. But then the conclusion of the Gemara is clearly that this was a positive thing, right? They were saying that this like recognition was something that's done for someone who is considered great within their generation. So like, yeah, he did like silly and maybe embarrassing things, and that was great because people had fun. Okay, and then this next bit is just a little quote from Brachot where it says, Amar Rav Ashi, Agar de Behilula Mile, which is basically the idea that like the core simcha or like a joyful thing about a wedding is words, right? That like the core of the simcha comes in things that people say. Which will be interesting when we like play out what the different main like ikar ideas of like what the ikar of simcha is. Even though technically Yom Shel Shlomo slightly predates some of our stuff in our Seif, I think we'll go to the Torah Shulchan Aruch now, and we'll come back to look at some of the different shutim on this. But for now, let's go to the Torah. And Yavni, can you read the Torah Aleph?
Give me a moment to open it, or you can ask someone else if you want. Alright. מצווה גדולה לשמח חתן וכלה ולרקד בפניה ולרקוד לפניה ולומר שהיא נאה וחסודה ואפילו אינה נאה. ואמרו על רבי יהודה ברבי אלעאי שהיה נוטל בד של הדס ומרקד לפני הכלה ואומר כלה נאה וחסודה. והיא תמיד במדרש למה לא אכלו הכלבים כפות של איזבל, לפי שהייתה מרקדת בהן לפני חתן וכלה. וכל הנהנה מסעודת חתן ואינו משמחו עובר בחמש קולות. Should I just keep going? This is, yeah. עובר בחמש קולות.
Yeah, this is the חמש קולות.
דכתיב כל ששון וכל שמחה, כל חתן וכל כלה, כל מצלות חתנים, מחופתם וגומר. Okay.
You want to translate?
Oh, sure. Is there a problem on my end that the audio is coming by weird, or is everyone getting it broken up?
It might be me. I can see if I can
I think
switch.
you're breaking up a little bit for me,
But
but
in the
I'm
meantime, do
hearing
you want
much.
to translate?
Yeah, Lexie, your connection's not the greatest, but Yavni seems to be okay.
Okay. I mean, so okay, so it's a great mitzvah. It's a big mitzvah to go to make the chatan and the kala happy and to dance before them and to say that the kala is wonderful, and even if she's not, and the stories that we just heard about the particular rabbis and their dances and their statements, and furthermore, it says in Chazal that anyone who doesn't, in Masechet Brachot, I think, anyone who doesn't, anyone who goes to the meal of the Chatan and the Kala and doesn't bring them joy is transgressing on 5 voices, because there are 5 times that the word kol is listed in this pasuk, and 2 of them are kol chatan and kol kala, and one of them is kol sasod, and 2 of them are kol sasod and kol simcha. Yeah.
I have a question. Wait, Lexie, do you think there's any connection between thinking that the kala is nice, and chasuda, and gracious, however you want to translate, generous, and dancing in front of her? In other words, is one leading to the other? Are they interconnected?
Right, it is interesting. And there's also, we'll get into the question of to what extent, like, is the dancing something that's specifically done like before the kala? Because we do say like Ketzad Meraktin Lifnei kala, or is that something that's done before both of them? And as Alan pointed out, like whether the Merakdin is like a separate thing from this, or whether actually the Ikar is that you're kind of just like telling her nice things. I think that the two, like in the Gemara, are told as if they're linked, right? Because we say the Ketzad Meraktin, and the answer is that you say like Kalana v'chasuda. But as we'll see, again, obviously the idea is that you should be capable of doing that with anyone, regardless of what specific kind of formulation you're using or what specifically
Well, maybe
you think
it's
about.
I was talking about this with my brother, and he says it's a big idea in Greek. He's a professor of Greek culture, Greek classics, and he was saying it's also in Judaism that there is an idea of like sort of psyching yourself up. If you think, you sort of tell yourself, if you think that these are a great couple, if you think that they're nebuch, who cares about these people? They're just like all ugly old hags, and this couple, and I'm not interested. But if you're excited, but if you think that they're nice people, then it might be a motivator to dance. Maybe that's what it means, Kate. I mean, I don't know if this is where you're going, but maybe Kate said Merakti. In other words, how do we motivate yourself to dance? Think of the people as great people.
No, I think it's true. And I think it kind of works both ways. I think you have the aspect of like, when you really like people and are really excited about them, you want to create like a joyous atmosphere. You want to celebrate them, whatever. And also potentially in cases where, frankly, maybe you have less spontaneous excitement about them. Maybe in the case of like, Eno Na'ev, even if we don't want to interpret that literally as like someone who's not pretty, but if like for whatever reason you're less excited about these people, I think it kind of works the other way too. If sometimes like the whole, like if you smile enough, it makes you feel a little happier. Like dancing and things like that get you into like an excited mood and maybe will help you feel excited about this, even if you're not having such a spontaneous overflow of emotion. So look at the Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch himself does not add much to what we just read. So Shulchan Aruch, Sif Aleph, just says mitzvah l'samech hatam v'kala l'erkod lefaneha lifnehem v'lomar shehi na'eh v'chasuda. Right. And also, I initially said lefaneha, but he says that you dance before both of them, and you say that she's a nice, graceful, beautiful kala. And then the Rama adds umatzinu sh'Rabbi Yehuda bar Eli haya meraked lifnei kala. That's just adding one of the things the Torah mentioned from our Gemara. Umvatlin Talmud Torah lehachnasat kala lechuppah. Right. So that's another thing that comes up in the Seif, the idea that like the mitzvah of like facilitating weddings and facilitating the joy of weddings is so significant that you even will do Bitul Talmud Torah to enable it. Okay, so I want to look at the Taz on the Taz Aleph on this, because I think it addresses some of the questions that we've been raising about what exactly, what purpose these words are serving, what it means to lie or not lie when talking about them. So Aaron, are you good doing the Taz?
So it seems actually his gears of the Shulchan Aruch does not say lifnehem.
Yeah.
Lomar mashma damir lav hainu rikud. Hava barashi perik tuktuba mavar the rikud hainu ha'amira. Agav, and so just let me know where to stop. Agav nazkir mashechidashti b'sif dalaf b'pshat ze b'gmara v'ze lashoni.
Siyata Dishmaya.
Siyata Dishmaya. Beit Shammai kala k'mochi lefi yofya v'chashivotea mekalsinota. Beit Hillel kala ne'ev chasuda. Pirush Rashi ichud shel chesed mashuch aleha. Amar le Beit Shammai le Beit Hillel, etc., etc. Should I reread it or skip it?
You can just reread it, but you don't have to retranslate the
Hare she'ayta chigera suma amrinan kala ne'ev chasuda. V'atorah amram midavar sheker tirchak. Amar Beit Hillel Beit Shammai lidvarechem mishlekach mekach ra min hashuk yishavchena be'einav or yiganena be'einav. Have omer yishvechena be'einav. Mikan amru chachamim lo lam te'dato shel dam urevet im abriot v'yesh ledaktek tuva b'hai plukta chada. I forgot the long line. La lama likala havle lemar kamot shehi. Hello, who's karkvar or mikodem? The two, the fiamet. The betula ketuv deim yesh bamum ishtakuva lo yesh bachu. I kind of should know. Okay, so L'raked levana means, i.e., that Amira is not the same as Rikud. But Rashi says that Rikud is actually just Amira. And then he goes back through the Gemara, and there are two things he's picking up on. The first is, why does it repeat the word kala rather than just saying Beit Shammai says kamochahi? Why does it say specifically kala kamochahi? Betosfot sham. And then the second question is regarding, he's going to raise some potential kashas from the Tosfot about what they say about if she has a mum, one should not speak. Tema de enlecha biush gadol mizeh de biyofot yirkedu v'mechuarot lo yirkedu. Rabechashu chazal shelo levayesh b'inyan kazeh kahai betu b'av hayibna Yisrael yotzot b'kli lavan shoalim kadei shelo levayesh mi she'en lo kadita b'yesh nochlim. V'tu delishna de kitzad marakti mashma b'chol hakalot marakti nchen. V'tu b'mashma mishlekach mekach ra heach mevi raya mimad amrinan inshe al tagan hachachamim tahabemet al zeh shayach lakshod v'aktiv midavar sheker tirchak. So he's addressing, should I translate literally or just summarize?
Summarize.
The possibility that if there are people you don't have Amira for, is it possible you might also have Kala where you don't have Rikud for? And he's rejecting that possibility.
Right. I mean, he's saying he's like, if the whole idea is that like we're supposed to be bringing like joy to the Chatan and Kala, like how are you supposed to do that if you're essentially saying, well, because you are like less pretty than an average Kala, we're not going to dance in front of you and compliment you. Like that's like mamish busha. And we see that Chazal cares about trying to avoid that.
Beit Shammai svira lahu de b'lashon ze yomar lekol hakolot kala kamot shehi. Perusho shakala hazot hi b'chol hashleimut harayot la. אם כן הוא שבח גדול להיפות, ולאינם יפות, אף אגב דאין שבח לעניין יופי שלה. מכל מקום יש לפרש לפי עניינה שיש לה קצת מעלות בשאר דברים. So what Beit Shammai is actually saying is he's not saying you give a factual description of how a person looks, but you actually say the phrase kala kamot shehi, which is complimentary to everyone, and then you can also add in particular compliments based on a person's specific appearance. Beit Hillel omrim kala na'ay v'chasuda, v'zel lashon yiparesh al hakalot she'afilu chigeret o suma yesh ala chut shel chesed b'nei chatan shela ki omale lo matzach chen b'einav lo nasa tatzarich lirot et kala tchila. So when Beit Hillel says kala na'ay v'chasuda and Rashi says that there's a chut shel chesed, what they're really saying is the chatan should be the chatan sees the kala as beautiful, because if he didn't, he wouldn't have married her. Hikshu alehem Beit Shammai and Olam Yisperu the chasuda the kamar hainu shechut shel chesed shlam meshoch beinei kol adam v'zeh sheker hu. The Torah amar midavar sheker tirchak the hainu shelo ledaber dvarim hanir'im la sheker beinei habriot. And so Beit Shammai's response to them is not that they will be literally lying, but that when you say, if you're going to say that a kala is not a chasuda, and with the implication being in the eyes of her husband, people might think you are speaking in some sort of objective terms, or that you're speaking about how everybody is experiencing the kala. And when they bring in the phrase that the Torah says midavar sheker tirchak, what they mean is you should stay away from things that might be interpreted as a lie, even if you don't intentionally mean them as a lie. Al zeh tirtzu Beit Hillel, dakvar noda minhag kol adam shenogim shemi shelokach mekach ra meshavchin haroim beinav kedei shelo yister b'imkein av kam bevada yavinu kolam shechasida dekamar v'chasuda dekamar hainu beinei hachatan shela kanal nachon beperish mamar zeh siyat shmai. Everybody's going to understand that the person is speaking about the chatan's subjective experience and not making a claim about how everybody else is subjectively experiencing the kala.
Right. And it's interesting, I mean, according to the way the Taz formulates Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel, like they both think that you should be saying nice things. It's just that Beit Hillel basically thinks there's a certain kind of formula that you say, whereas Beit Shammai says you kind of like individualize it. And if it's somebody who you can't praise their looks, you say other nice things about them, because presumably there's something nice that you can say about them. And I imagine presumably maybe the logic behind Beit Hillel is that it's kind of an equalizer, right? If you have kind of like a nice like formula that you say, like a kala who is so beautiful and graceful and lovely, then you don't really have some people who are getting like heaped upon them all these praises, and some people who are like, you sew very well. But I don't know. I'm interested in people's thoughts on this. I found it really interesting. I was talking with a friend recently who was talking about, she's like going to a lot of weddings this summer. And she's like, I know there's a mitzvah to like make the kala and chatan joyful, but like, what if I don't love the chatan? Can I still like make am I still able to like rejoice with the kala? And I was like, yeah, I think the kind of logic here of the mekach ra one, right? That like, even if you're like close with these people, right? And you think there's something really not ideal, presumably you'd have articulated that before the wedding. But if you haven't and they're getting married, like it's a day of simcha, and you don't accomplish anything good by saying like negative things on a day of like rejoicing. Like they chose to do this, and clearly they have some amount of joy in it. And so like the productive and good thing is to contribute to that joy rather than to like negate it.
I actually recently had a very, very similar situation where we really did not like the chatan, and we had real issues with him even a week before the wedding. And it made for a very interesting wedding to l'samech et kala, and I was happy just to lo la'atzben et chatan. But as far as something subjective, you can always say to a kala, I've never seen you looking so radiant. And it's probably
Yeah.
true, even if she's unattractive. For her wedding day, she's probably more radiant than you've ever seen her before. And that's a very true statement.
Right, like everybody, and again, I think there's something very real to Rashi's Perush of Beit Hillel, which is that like even if somebody does not meet what society's current like beauty standards are, like everyone says brides are like beautiful or stunning because like when people are like joyful and all done up or whatever, like they are incredible to look at, like regardless of what people's like objective beauty standards are. Aaron?
I understood them as both having a verbal formula that Beit Hillel also has, right? The verbal formula of Kala Mochahi, but that I guess Beit Shammai, not Beit Hillel. Beit Shammai, I guess, is then saying, right, on the day of the wedding, you're trying to see the bride or the bride and the groom without a set of lenses you might usually walk around with, and Beit Shammai is saying you're trying to see the bride through the eyes of the, you might say, you're trying to see each partner through the eyes of the other. So rather than just simply removing the lenses you usually have, you're instead replacing them, at least for the day, with the lenses each of those people sees each other with.
Well, that's Beit Hillel, right? As in Beit Shammai.
The first Beit Shammai is saying remove whatever sort of societal perceptions of beauty and what is important and standards, take that away. And Beit Hillel is saying, rather than doing that, actually just impose a different set of lenses, and those lenses are each of these lovers' understanding and views of each other.
I think that leads into acknowledging like a kind of regardless of either what everybody else, but all the other like Bnei Adam's like opinions are, either just objectively of their looks or of anything else. Like what matters the most at that point is what these people think about each other. And so you're like, yeah, like your partner thinks that you're beautiful and you're beautiful. Like, shkaya. Alan?
Just a technical and partly substantive question. The Taz mentions the case in Tosfot about Moon, and then drops it. Was it clear to everyone what the Taz's versions of Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai would then make of that Tosfot case? Do they reject it altogether because it's just not something that we as decent people do, or does it somehow fit into this conceptual scheme that he has laid out?
My reading was honestly that the Taz was mostly just rejecting the Tosfot, which like the Taz is sometimes willing to do that. Like it is a bit like, you know, a lot of times we think of like Achronim feeling the need to accommodate Rishonim, but like sometimes the Taz just doesn't like a Rishon and will essentially dismiss it. That was how I read it, but I mean, if other people have different views on how he's interacting with it.
He says Tema. Tema is usually a pretty strong thing to say. So
He
wait,
says
can we?
Sema, he doesn't really resolve it for them, right?
Right.
He says Sema, and he doesn't say, well, actually the Tosfot are saying. He just seems to basically be like, and that's a stupid thing to say, because that would be a huge busha and like really.
Well, to not say anything, those are saying to be quiet, right?
Yeah.
And if everyone's going to be
saying,
quiet,
like,
then everyone walking around not saying anything is going to be pretty clear that there's a problem going on here.
But again, if the standard is that you're offering shevach and that you're dancing, that you're rejoicing,
Right.
and here you're just like walking around silently, like you can't be like, oh, well, I'm not insulting them. Like, no, you clearly are insulting them by not saying something in contrast to the norm.
That was my read. I just wasn't sure whether that, maybe there's still some room for Tosfot's position, but it sounds like it's out the window.
Well, according to the Taz.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not sure that there's a formula here being promoted by either Beit Hillel or Beit Shammai, according to the Taz. I thought that it's just a different kind of praise. That the Tosfos, the Taz is saying that the Beit Shammai is saying, sort of say she's a great person. In other words, she's a great person, or you don't have to say exactly kamochi. You can say she's a wonderful person. She's a great heart. Find something that is real, and praise her about that. Come up. And that could be a great praise. Or he says, shleimut, she's the highest perfection of, she's a perfect woman. That you could say. But Hillel is saying,
Aaron was saying that it's
say she's beautiful. Well, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I read Beit Hillel as being a bit more of a formula in the sense of like the idea of like you say the Kala is beautiful, And you can say that because either she's beautiful by objective standards or she's not beautiful by objective standards, but she's beautiful in the eyes of her partner.
Mhm.
And so that's true. You're not lying either way. And because people will
Right.
like know that that's the context here, that that's what you're talking about, you're not lying because they'll agree. They're like, yeah, like in the eyes of so-and-so, she is beautiful, regardless of what the
Right.
general
I mean,
perception
no,
is. Whereas
I think it's
are like, you don't call her beautiful. Beit Shammai are like, we associate the word beautiful with physical beauty. That's a more objective kind of thing. And so if you don't think someone is objectively beautiful, you don't use that word, you use other nice things.
right. And Hillel is sort of, I don't think Hillel is really a formula. I think you could say beautiful, whatever other words there are for beautiful, pretty. I never saw such a pretty
Yeah,
word.
I also don't think like Hillel's formula, I don't think is meant to be like to the exception of everything else. Like I think it's
Right.
meant to be like an example, a standard. It's not like you say, Kalana Ava Chasuda, and then you just like walk away. Like you can, I mean, the presumption is that you can like expound upon
Right.
that.
But I think that there's a deep thing there going on. He's saying that really the concern or the hesitation that the Khatan might have is he's worried, is this woman really pretty? And so Hillel is saying, reconfirm him, yes, she's pretty. Whereas either Shammai is saying that's maybe not the number one concern of him. Don't worry about that. Or maybe any kind of praise is acceptable to him. I think that.
Or it also doesn't even have to be that he's unsure, right? Like I think like I've had the case of the Mekachra, like sometimes people buy something and they love it and everyone else thinks it's like terrible, right? But like they just deeply, truly love this thing they've purchased. And if they love this thing,
right,
and they're also not going to return this,
there's something called
you don't
buyer's
accomplish
remorse.
anything.
I was thinking it's like buyer's remorse. Like, he can feel like, oh no, maybe I made a mistake here.
No, I think either one's valid. I was reading it as like maybe there is remorse. Maybe it's just that like he loves it, and even if most other people think that it's a poor choice, like you don't accomplish anything by telling him that. If he's feeling happy about it, then like shkoyach.
Right.
Aaron.
Just about what Rav Nachum said. I think Beit Shammai is advocating a specific formula, right? It says "B'lashon zeh yomar l'chol hakolot kala kamot shehi," and then they say what the perush is. But I think Beit Shammai would not say like you give like a general compliment or a non-physical compliment. It seems like you are literally for them, and then you're supposed to say literally kala kamot shehi, and then like if you want to add like another detail or two about a particular thing, like everybody can get a detail. But that actually like Beit Shammai is being very makpid that we are saying the exact same thing to everybody, saying like, come as you are.
Right. I was trying to get to what I thought maybe is a deeper differentiation between them. In other words, what is a woman to be? How do young men want their? What are they looking for in a woman? And
there's also,
praise her about that thing.
Relating to the buyer's remorse framework, there's also obviously something interesting in the fact that like we're only complimenting the kala. Like we'll talk about the different ways that like we are meant to like mistameach hatani makala, but like the compliment section is only framed as being something you're doing to the kala, and it feels kind of like this thing of like you're complimenting the kala. You could say on the one hand, you could say maybe it's because we're more focused on the kala's joy, which is maybe a happier framework, or you could say it's kind of like the chatan is like acquiring her, and so you're like, yes, you did a very good job. Like, nice. She's so pretty. Like congratulations, right? Whereas we don't talk about how beautiful the chatan is. At least that's not something that's articulated here.
Right. Well, the Talmud is ultimately in those days written for men. The men are writing it to tell other men what to say to each other. I don't think anybody's talking to the kala in those days. I don't think they were telling the woman you're beautiful. I think that we can say that, but I think they were saying, you go up to the chatan and you say, the woman is beautiful.
I don't think that's true. I think, and also there's a bit in the same sentence that I didn't bring that talks about, I think it's like Rav Ashi or someone like carrying the kala on his shoulders. Like they were interacting with the kala. We see also then what we'll get in the next seif of like, that you're not supposed to stare at her too much, but it does seem like you are actually allowed to directly address the kala. Rav Landis?
This is the place for an old rabbi to speak to all you guys, gals. Honestly, I've never seen a kala who wasn't beautiful. And it's so true. And it's one of the things that Yiddishkeit does right. is that the community also allows for a person to be beautiful. And they make a person confident. And after, I'm not inviting you to any wedding because you're ready to punch out the chassan. I don't know what that's about, but don't answer.
I
Don't
wasn't going
answer.
to punch him out. I just wasn't going to
I understand.
get on his
That's what I
bad
say.
side
I
any
would
more
never-
than I already
wouldn't
was.
invite you to. I wouldn't invite you to a chuppah. So I mean,
It was
really,
my niece. They didn't have a choice.
they didn't have a choice. Okay, so we make people beautiful, and they become beautiful, and they are beautiful. And by the way, different shapes and different, you have some objective, you talk about objective, the beauty comes out, and there's a beauty in many different ways. And the people, can't believe I'm saying this, and the people who make other people beautiful, I come from LA, become beautiful themselves. You become a beautiful person when you make other people beautiful. Okay? This is actually a crucial thing to do. It's where, but it's not just generosity, it's an objective fact. They're all beautiful. It's wonderful. Why can't someone be beautiful? I'm gonna say, what are you gonna say? You're gonna say you were 3.8, you were almost Phi Beta Kappa, dance around like that. I mean, that's ridiculous. That's stupid. So that's it. The halacha is, the psak halacha is, kalas are beautiful. You can help make them beautiful, and you don't have to be, you yourself do not have to be ugly. You yourself can be beautiful by making other people beautiful. And that's the halacha. That's how Jews have been operating in the past couple thousand years. Look, I was a rabbi in Beverly Hills. That's a pretty high bar when it comes to some of these issues. And you know what? Everyone was beautiful. So
what do you make of the Beit Hillel Beit Shammai debate then?
There's a case when Judaism improves. There's a case when it improves. I would say it's a starting place in some situations. How you start wrapping your head around it. But we've done well about that. You got all these halachas of how to do hachana for Shabbos. Then you have all these mystical types of what kavanas that you have. So finally, basically, we know how to get ready for Shabbos in a good way. Doesn't mean we shouldn't look past, look up certain halachas, but we learned how to do it. Here we've learned how to do this. I'm interested in the performance and the hana that everyone can have in this halacha at the end. All of a sudden, everyone's going to, okay, leave it at that.
I think because I want to get to some of the sources I included on the sheet, I'm not going to read the Beit Shmuel inside. I mean, basically, the Beit Shmuel is talking about this issue of Mevatli and Talmud Torah, and we have this discussion as to whether it's like, if you like see a wedding happening in front of you, that you're not allowed to just like sit there with your Gemara, you have to join in, or whether it's like you hear that it's happening in town and you have to like hop up and go join. And there's dispute about it. Some people are like, no, it's only if you like see it. You don't have to actually like dismiss your Talmud Torah just because it's happening somewhere. And some are like, no, like they compare it to a mate, and we say a kala actually takes precedence to a mate, and a mate you have to attend to even if they're not right in front of you in some cases. So the kala too. So that's a question some of the sources get at, like how big this mitzvah is that you would even do Bitul Torah. And then the second seif, this gets at something that'll also come up in the shutim, which is, as I said, the kind of like pull back, right? We're like, like simcha, rejoicing, kel dechala, she's beautiful. But then we're like, asur listakel b'kala. But you can't actually look at her. And the Rama adds, "Aval mutar listakel b'tachshitin she'alea u'priyat rasha." But you can look at her nice jewelry. The people who, as Rav Landy said, have made her beautiful. You can look at the way she's done up. And then in the Torah, he also notes that the Rosh quoted some people who are like, on the first day, you can actually even look at the kala in the face. because, and this kind of gets at where Nachum was mentioning this idea, and also, again, the kind of, we're trying to encourage the man about what good of a acquiring he's done, and be like, it increases the chivuv of the man when he sees all people like staring at how beautiful she is, like more like, wow, I have a really beautiful kala. But we dismiss that. We say, no, we don't hold like the Yeshomrim. You shouldn't even look at her the first day. So that's the second sieve. But I want to hop back to the source sheet. So I'm going to share my screen again. Okay. So we have a couple sources from the Yam Shel Shlomo, so the Maharshal. So this first one, basically the context is just like, what songs can you sing and what like music can you play? Like, can you sing songs, play music that is like not specifically Shevach to Hashem, other types of songs. So Andres, would you be able to pick up from the bold here, the Hada Amrinan?
Yes. Ade Amrinan zimbra בפומיה אסור. המימילי כגון נגינת של אהבת אדם לחברו. לשבח יפה ביופיו כדרך שישמעאלים קוראים. מה זה?
It's a transliteration, Ashach.
אוקיי, אוקיי. אבל דברי שירות ותשבחות וזיכרון חסידיו של הקדוש ברוך הוא, אין אדם מישראל נמנע מזאת, ומנהג בכל ישראל לאומרם בבית חתונות ובבית משתאות בכל נגינות ובכל שמחה, ולא ראינו מי שמוחה בזאת. עד כאן לשונו. So I'm going to translate it there. So he says, so...
This is also, I didn't put the attribution, but this is the riff.
Oh, okay, so the riff is saying that what he's describing what kind of songs or music or whatever, and he says that בפומיה אסור, like when you sing with words from your mouth, it's forbidden. Is this what he's saying?
Really, so that which was said, that like songs in the mouth are forbidden. Hanemile, what is that referring to?
This refers to songs that are about love to his partner, to Havero, yeah, to his friend, in which you praise his beauty, and as the Ismailites do with the Ashach. And okay, but those songs and the praises, nobody of Israel is going to say that that's forbidden. And it's a custom for the whole people of Israel to say this in chatunot and in bars. And
I think Beit Mishtot are like banquets or whatever that I think are actually potentially related to the chatuna. But yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to continue now. ויראה מדבריו, דלא עדיף בית חתנים מבית המשתאות, דלא שרינן לזמר, אלא בדברי שירות ותשבחות, אכן מדברי התוספות, דיבורה מתחיל זמרה, משמע דבית חתנים, שמצווה הוא לשמח חתן וכלה, שירי בכל דברי שיר. שרי, בכל דברי שיר. רק שלא יהיה בה ניבול, ואף שבתוספות לא הוזכר אלא חופה מכל מקום מאחר שכתב שיר של מצווה שהוא לשמח חתן וכלה, אם כן כל ימי המשתה בכלל, וכן עיקר, והעיקר כלי זמר לא שרי, אלא לשמח חתן וכלה. וכל שכן זמרה דפומה, ואפשר בית חתנים שכתב הריף, הוא קודם נישואים, דלא הווה של מצווה, דלא שרי, אלא בשירות ותשבחות. אוקיי.
So you don't have to read word for word, but you can summarize.
So I think they're saying that any kind of song is share is allowed because the important thing is to make happy the Khatan with the Kala. And and this would go against maybe the Tosafot.
No, so this goes with the Tosfot. This basically the Maharshal is saying the riff, the most straightforward reading of the riff would seem to imply that even at like a Khatuna, you can only sing like, you know, Zmira, like things that are like praising Hashem, but not just like Stam songs. Whereas he says, no, like the implication of the Tosfot is that you can sing anything at a Khatuna because like you're supposed to be, because these are ways of rejoicing and it's a mitzvah to make the Khatan and Kala rejoice. And so if singing is going to make them happy, it doesn't have to be songs of Shevach, it can just be songs. And he's like, you know, maybe the riff when he said that like in the Beit Chatna and the Beit Mishtot that you're only allowed to sing the songs of Shevach, maybe he's referring to like actually before the Chatuna when it's not yet a mitzvah, which is a bit of a dachuk explanation. But I think, again, this is one of the examples of, on the one hand, they think that there's something, they have their reservations around the idea of general, just like songs that are songs for fun or for love or for joy that don't specifically relate to Hashem, to some kind of like holy context. But on the other hand, they're like, songs make people happy, right? And so like we're explicitly trying to do whatever we can to make people rejoice. And if that's what's going to happen here, then like, fine, sing whatever you want, as long as, right, rakshale heba nivul. Like it shouldn't be something like inappropriate, but like if it's pretty and it'll make people happy, then sing it. Shkaya. Okay, and then we have the next bit in this Maharshal, building on the idea of like singing at weddings, references a very interesting psak of the Ravya. Sarah, can you read Yudchet?
וכתב אבי עזרי שמותר לומר לגוי לנגן בכלי שיר בחופות. דאמירה לגוי במקום מצווה שרי. So presumably this is on Shabbos.
Yes.
Right. So he's saying that it's allowed to like basically have a non-Jewish band like play instruments on Shabbat because it's necessary for a mitzvah. So and like the whole sort of ikar of what it means to have simchat chatan v'kala is to have instruments. Should I skip to the bolded part or just keep reading?
You can keep reading.
Okay. V'kol sheken hacha de'afilu Yisrael ein bo isur ela mishum gzeira ve'ein isur ve'ein la'asur la'omra lagoy adkan. Okay, and he's like, actually here it's even more so because the whole isur on playing instruments is itself a gzeira that you might come to then fix the instrument, and so it's like a bridge too far essentially to say that you're going to prohibit amirela akum for something that's in the first place only a gzeira. Al mashana tantam lahatir mishum de amira lagoy shari b'makom mitzvah. Ani katafti lamala she'ein lahatir amira divrei avi ezri. Ela al ta'amo shehitir mishum mitzvah lechud. Ela le'olam afu modeh de b'nisuin.
I think you skipped a line. Ani katafti lamala she'ein lahatir amira lagoy ela b'davar.
Sorry, yeah. Ela b'davar, that makes much more sense. Ela b'davar shehu atzmo doche Shabbat, kigon mila. Okay, so now he's going to say, but I think that actually we only are going to allow this kind of reason that it's a mitzvah to say that you can do Amira Lagoy in a case where the mitzvah itself is doche Shabbat, like mila. Ad kadlashon hatur. Mikol makom nireh shahatur eno cholek al divrei avi HaEzer. So, but I think actually that the Tur doesn't agree with my father's psak. Ela al ta'amo shehitir mishum mitzvah lechud. But he just disagrees. He doesn't agree with the psak itself. He just agrees with the reason that it's only that it's mutar because of the fact it's a mitzvah. Ela leolam afu modeh de b'nisuin hetiru shemitzvah rabahi. V'lo ha'imidu hachamim divreihem. בפרט שאין ישראל עושה מאותם בעצמו, כנגד מצווה גדולה כזו, לשמח חתן וכלה, שזוכה להשם קולות, מדמה בפרקה. Sorry.
לחמישה קולות.
לחמישה קולות, yes, okay. מדמה בפרק כמה דברכות לקולות של מתן תורה, ואיזבל הרשע תוכיח, ואין משמע לשון הטור, שכתב על הטעם וכולי. משמע שאינו חולק אלא על הטעם, אבל לא על הדין, וכן אמר דבר. So like, essentially, he's gonna stick with his father's psak and kind of reduce the tour to saying the issue is only the reasoning and not actually the conclusion itself.
Right, that he's like, the Torah doesn't think that like stam, any mitzvah that itself isn't doche Shabbos would be something you can do Amira Lagoyam. We have like big disputes around that, but he's like, the Torah agrees though that like Misamech Hatan V'Kala is a big mitzvah. So for that one, you can tell a goy.
Right. So he's basically right. He's having the tour maintain a distinction. It just like isn't a distinction where there's like the same level of technical language, right? So like you'd say like for Milad, there's like really strong kind of technical language that's like really dochet. It's like has a sort of a category to go with it in a way that saying, okay, this is just a really big deal.
Yeah, I mean, then again, he's like, okay, look, it's a really big deal. It's a really big mitzvah to make people rejoice. And also, again, there's the line that the Rav Yah uses, which is like, "Ve'en simchat chatan v'kala v'lo kli shir." That he's like, the ikar of what it is to rejoice is like music and like instruments, right? Like that's what rejoicing and chatunot look like. And so, obviously, there's a whole question of what they're doing with having these on Shabbos, but that goes back to previous simanim. Okay, I'm for the sake of time just gonna read through this Chashukei Chamed briefly. So these last couple are obviously more recent tshuvot. Chashukei Chamed, I believe he's still alive. Yeah, he's like very old, still alive. So Kesad Misamchin Chatan. So Shayla. Nemar Mesach Brachot. ואמר רבי חלבו, אמר רב הונא, כל הנהנה מסעודת חתן ואינו משמחו עובר בחמש קולות עיין שם. Right, so this is the classic that we've seen quoted. וכתב על זה רבי עקיבא איגר בדרוש וחידוש, וזה לשונו, טוב לאיש שיחזיק בה. והמגן אברהם חשבו בסימן קנ"ו, הרבה עניינים שצריך אדם לדקדק, גם בעניין זה לשמח חתן וכלה כחשיב. וצריכים לדקדק בזה כל אחד כפי דרגתו. לבן תורה, לשמחו בדברי תורה, כי הוא עיקר שמחה, ולאיש פשוט בשיחה בדברי אגדה, וליותר פשוט בשיחה נאה, ומילתא דבדיחותא במילי דעלמא, וצריך דקדוק גדול בזה שלא יהיה שום נגיעה חס ושלום בהוללות, ולהיות ערום בעניינים אלה, ושיהיה על פי דרכי המוסר ללמוד מה משיכות חולין שמדבר לחתן, ונוגע להנהגה בדרך התורה והמסורה. Right, so basically, we see Rabbi Akiva Eiger and Magen Avraham talking about like Simcha doesn't look the same for everybody, right? That like different people are gonna like rejoice with different things. They feel like someone is a Talmid Chacham, maybe just like talking to them about Torah is gonna make them really excited. And like people who are less into Torah, just like chat with them, tell them nice stories or like tell jokes. Like that it doesn't look the same for everybody. And so you should be like thoughtful about who the Chatan and Kala are and what like best suits them. And then we have a fun shaila. ויש לשאול, בחתונה של חתן בן תורה, בה משתתפים כמה מאות בני תורה, וכי כל אחד ייגש וילחש באוזניו של חתן דבר תורה, הרי יכלה הזמן דבר תורה לא יסתיימו. Okay, look, does everybody need to do this specific way? We say a ben Torah needs to be told Torah. Okay, if 500 guests are all like, here's my Dvar Torah for you on the day of your wedding, like, that will never end. They will never have a moment's peace. So the answer, יראה לעניות דעתי, צריך כל הציבור להעמיד שליח תלמיד חכם אחד שישמיע דברי תורה בקול רם, דברים המשמחים לב כל שומעם, והחתן עם כל המשתתפים ישמחו יחדיו בשמחת אמיתית. It's like, no, you don't need every single person to go give a divrei Torah. You appoint somebody. And this gets also to part of the question I was raising earlier of like, the extent to which it's about like what each individual is doing, like I, Lexie at this chatuna, need to make them happy versus like, I, as a part of this collective at so-and-so's wedding, we need to make sure that they're happy. And it's kind of like our job together to create that atmosphere to do that. And it's not so much about like what I specifically am doing. Then it adds a nice little story about somebody who told fun divrei Torah. I talked about Parnasa too, which apparently is fun. And then this next bit, v'yesh la'ir
Oh, it wasn't just that he talked about Parnasa, it was that he like let him know that he was gonna save money, right?
Yeah, that it was like he talked about in Parnasa in a way that is, and he like mentioned that he was gonna get more money, about how long he was gonna be supported from his father-in-law, basically. And v'yesh la'ir sheknira Rabbi Akiva Eiger saver she'en mitzvah lirkod lifnei chatan el lifnei hakala. So Rabbi Akiva Eiger thinks that like specifically the rikud is about the kala, hence the ketzad meratzim lifnei hakala, and that like we are obligated to make the chatan rejoice, but that looks different. That looks more like words. לכן הוא אינו כותב שאפשר לקיים מצווה של לשמח חתן בריקודים אלו לפניו, אך יוים במסכת במציע שכח את החמר להביא פרברים וחלילים לכלה, פירוש רש"י לשמח חתן וכלה. But we have this Gemara that talks about like when basically you have to bring these different like flutes and horns or whatever lekala, and Rashi is like to make the chatan and kala rejoice, implying that this like music / dance is potentially for both of them. So that's a question. Who has anyone not read yet today? Josh, I don't think you've read. Do you want to read the next little Chashikei Chamed?
I thought I could do some Ben Ish Chai.
If you would strongly prefer the Ben Ish Chai, you can have somebody else take this one.
No, it's okay. הכלל היוצא מדברי הנודע ביהודה, שלמען תועלת מותר להסתכן קצת, אבל למען שעשוע וטיול אסור. Okay, so הנודע ביהודה seems to say that for a good reason you can put your life in danger a bit, but just for fun you cannot. אפילו כשהחשש קטן. To be very careful. נשמרתם נפשותיכם מאוד. ואם כן, אם אין דרך אחרת לשמח חתן וכלה אלא בקצת סכנה, ייתכן שהדבר מותר. אבל למעשה, מכיוון שאפשר לשמח אף בלי סכנה, אם כן הסכנה נכללת בדבר הרשות, ולדבר הרשות אין להסתכן כלל. However, we learn from this that if there's no other way to make the Chatan and Kala happy without putting yourself in danger, it could be permitted. But I must say, since it is possible to make them rejoice without putting anyone in danger, then it's a voluntary danger, and that's not something which you're allowed to do.
Right. So the larger context of this question was basically about like doing acrobatics for the Chatan and Kala. Like, I mean, you've seen like either been at weddings or seen videos of weddings where people are doing like back handsprings and backflips in the middle of like a circle. And so, I mean, this would potentially say that if you can make them happy without doing that at all, maybe just don't do it at all. But also part of it is like, depending on how familiar you are with those things, some of those actually do, like if you're somebody who's been doing back handsprings since you were 3, you actually can do them with like pretty minimal danger. And so it's going to like really excite the Chatan and Kala, then maybe you could do that. But like if you've been working on your backflip for a while, but you're still like a little so-so, like probably don't pull it out at the Chatuna. You can just dance instead is the main takeaway. Okay. Yavni, can you read the Ben Ish Chai?
Sure. מצווה גדולה לשמח חתן וכלה ולעשות להם מילי דבדיחות שישמחו. ושכר המשמחם עצום מאוד, ורק ייזהר שלא ישמחם בליצנות וכל איסור קל אפילו מדרבנן. וכל שכן שלא ירקדו אנשים ונשים ביחד, ואפילו ריקוד נשים לבדם בפני האנשים אסור. כי יתגרה יצר הרע באנשים הרואים, וצווחו כמה רבני האחרונים בדברים כאלה, דאין להם היתר משום שמחת חתן וכלה, ומצווה לשמחם ומצווה לשמחם בכלי זמר, ואפילו שנעשו נישואין תוך י"ב חודש דפטירת אביהם או אמם, לא יבטלו מהם שמחת כלי זמר. וכבר אמרו מעבירין את המת מלפני הכלה, ועיין במעריל ז"ל שהורה לעשות החופה במקום אחר בשביל כלי זמר שאינם יכולים להביאו במקומם, יעיין שם. Do you want me to translate any of this, or this is clear enough?
Summarize. I mean,
Was
really,
that, it's a big deal to making the Chatan and the Kala happier is very important, and you get a lot of reward for it. But you have to, be careful not to do it with things that are asul. For example, mixed dancing, and or even the women dancing in sight of the men. And it is in particular a mitzvah to make them happy with musical instruments, even if one of them is in the year of mourning. ופה הראינו בזמן
I'm not sure what all of those stand for, to be honest.
Okay. זקני רבנו משה חיים זלהה רצו הקהל לבטל כלי זמר בשמחת חתן וכלה, ולא רצה הרב זלהה להסכים בזה. There's some case where people wanted to not have instruments, and the Rav didn't allow them to not have instruments. וביום שבת אסור להביא גויים שנגנו בכלי זמר, וכמה אחרונים קראו תגר בזה. ופה עירנו היה מנהג מקודם קדמתה, כשיצא החתן מבית הכנסת בשחרית ללך לביתו, ילכו גויים לפניו בכלי זמר. וגם בביתו היו מנגנים כחצי שעה ותהילות לקהל יתברך. קודם כמה שנים נתבטל מנהג זה לגמרי, ולא ייזכר ולא ייפקד עוד. So there used to be the practice where he was from that Gentiles would walk the Chatan from the Beit Knesset to his house with musical instruments and play for him there in his house. And several years ago, that practice ended. Is this on Shabbat?
Yeah.
My assumption is yes. Otherwise, I don't think you would have had a problem with it.
Right?
It's on Shabbat, but you have to remember the Goyim didn't look like Jews, because the Jews in those days didn't look like Goyim. So there was no
Confusion.
Right. Whereas the Ben Ish Chai now is like, no, I would prefer you not do that. But yeah, so here again, we have both the idea of like, it's not just, on the one hand, like the idea of Kli Zemer being like really central, and also the idea of like Milei B'dichuta, that like jokes and things are a big part of what the Simcha looks like. And again, this idea of like, we want you to rejoice, it's super, super important, but chas v'shalom, you should do mixed dancing or things that are going to essentially lead to like rejoicing that looks more like licentious, as it were, that you need to keep this like a holy sort of rejoicing. Now Yosef just talks about, some people say you can have the chatan on your shoulders, some people say you should carry him in a chair. Either way, you can certainly at least raise him in a chair. They're like that, but if they want to put him on the shoulders, then that's fine. Let them do that. And then I want to finish with this bit from a book called The Jewish Wedding Now, which came out not so long ago, where Anita Diamond is talking about what some of this like Simcha looks over the ages. So first part, she just mentions the story from the Gemara of the guy who would juggle. The story seems to make a case not only for Simcha, but also for hilarity. It has long been customary to entertain couples with jokes, magic tricks, acrobatics, and ukulele solos. In other words, badchanut, silliness, the art of the badchan, a joker. For nearly 7 centuries, Eastern European weddings featured this character, sometimes called a leitzan or clown, or a marshal. Badchanim were paid professionals who sang, rhymed, posed riddles, dispensed compliments, and acted as masters of ceremonies. Badchanim were supposed to be learned enough to cite biblical verses and sentimental enough to elicit tears, but their primary function was to make people laugh. Today, the role of Badchan can be played by friends or relatives who can tell a joke and are willing to share the spotlight. The job begins weeks, if not months, before the big day, recruiting guests to entertain the wedding royalty with a limerick, a puppet show, or a display of acrobatics. At Yemenite weddings, professional singers and dancers are hired. Today, it might be a video, a PowerPoint presentation, or a poetry slam. As MCs, Badchanim can anoint the couple as royalty with paper crowns, read messages from people who could not attend, introduce the band, and help leave blessings before and after the meal. And so the rest, she gets into the different types of dancing and music that happens and the chair raising. But I don't want to take too much longer on this because I want us to have time to talk about the morning, of course, also important. But something I was thinking about is when we talk about this tension between what is like holy, appropriate, super important simcha, and what is like beyond the line, like it's something I'm thinking about in the context of like what I see modern day weddings look like. Obviously, there are like many modern day weddings where people are also not doing mixed dancing. Most of the weddings I'm at do have mixed dancing, right? And that's not considered to be, because that's like a normative thing for people, that's not considered to be a particularly like inappropriate or bawdy aspect of the simcha. And I'm like wondering what kind of those lines between like what is like really, joy that is honoring the wedding versus what's considered kind of like beyond the pale of what we're trying to do here looks like when you have different boundaries. I know that we have a ton of time to talk about that right now, but it's an interesting thing to think about. And also I was interested in like this section and the sources that recall that like they've been having like the leitzan, the clowns, the badchanut has been a thing for centuries, even though, as you saw, I think it was was it the Ben Ish Chai? Yeah, the Ben Ish Chai was like, don't have clowning. Clowning is not appropriate. That like you've always had some people being like, okay, like you can dance, you can sing, but don't do it this way. And presumably that's like people didn't always listen because people did things that they thought were fun and joyful, and that didn't always look like what the poskim ideally wanted them to be doing. Yeah, I think we should do a 5-minute break soon, but if people have any final thoughts or comments on this?
The Badchanim are very sophisticated in what they do. And it's in the Ashkenazic, I mean, not just Hasidic, in the Litvish community, Badchanim do pretty well. One reason why certain Rabbanim were against Badchanim is because Badchanim made a lot of fun out of the Rabbanim. So, that, as one Gadol said, actually heard, one Gadol said, not every wedding has to be Purim. In Purim, you have an Erev Rav, you have, anyway. So, just that.
I'm wondering if the Ben Ish Chai's position also is connected to something specific about a Rav from Baghdad, where the customs are going to be very, very, very different than those of Olam Ashkenaz.
For sure. Yeah, like I think that the Badchanut, like the specific role of the Badchan, from what I saw in the limited sources I was able to get on like Sephardi minhag, not just psak over the ages, was like less central. But I think also like the bedichut, at least, right? The idea of like joking silliness was a norm throughout the time. Sarah?
Yeah, I'm just struck by how many of these sources, like even the ones that are like, well, you can have like the Amira Lagoy on Shabbos, but then like don't actually yourself play the instruments, or like, no, don't do the Amira Lagoy. Like a lot of this is about testing some boundary and like going kind of right up to it and then not crossing. And I think that like that's sort of associated in some way with like a kind of outpouring of emotion where like you're almost you're almost not in control a little bit.
Right, like weddings are like a really,
I think it's very
quiet weddings all the time. That's a big thing. Like it's such a overwhelming experience, right?
Right, and like part of being overwhelmed in that way is like kind of towing up to the line and like not crossing to whatever you think is like the kind of assert territory. So I think some of what we're seeing is like calling out the practices that are just too far over, right? But that's also kind of part of the dance of like, no pun intended, of making it so that when you sort of have the outpouring of joy, it crosses over like the whatever the boundary is going to be. I was really struck
right
by
that we don't want to like limit. We don't want to like limit. No, continue.
Right. No, just my one of my closest friends from growing up is Mennonite, and they make the same jokes about mixed dancing about dancing that we make about mixed dancing. Like X and Y will lead to dancing because like for them that's the thing that's next over the line, right? And it's just so like I think that's part of what's being negotiated here. And then maybe that actually helps us talk about like in a world in a you know, if you're in a universe where like mixed dancing is just kind of the norm, like what is the thing that what is the line that we're towing, you know, coming close to but not crossing, and how do we talk about
and I think there always are lines, and I think as you're saying, it's a big part of this, like the reason that they're so both excited and worried here is that like we think that the simcha is so crucial, but we also, and we think that part of kind of like the upswell of feelings is part of the point, but we also know that kind of overwhelming emotion and excitement can lead to things beyond what we're trying to achieve. And so like trying to balance those two concerns. Okay, I'm gonna suggest we break for a few minutes now and come back at 10:22. Or you're not gonna eat, you're not gonna drink water, or you're not gonna eat bread. Basically being like, you have to have like realistic mourning that is like sustainable. And so then they offer kind of alternative things like the whole not plastering the entirety of your house, like the leaving the little bit uncovered. It's here, I've seen some houses, especially like in more Haredi neighborhoods, will do like have like basically Jerusalem stone section on the plaster, which is fascinating. Stuff got pretty fancy. Like I feel like the idea of the unplasteredness is that it's kind of like grim looking, whereas the like section of stone is like a bit decorative, but a lot of people will do that as their unplastered section. In any case, and then at the end, we're talking about what people do at weddings, right? Shne'emar, im yeshkachech Yerushalayim, tishkach yemini, tidbak lashoni lechiki v'gomer, my al rosh simchati, right? So the end of that classic chunk of like, if I don't put it upon the head of my joy, Amar Rav Yitzchak, ze afar makalash berosh chatanim. This is putting like whatchamacallit, char on the forehead of grooms. Amar le Rav Papa le'Abaye, hecha menacha. So Rav Papa asks, like, where do you put this? How do you put this on? Bimkom tefillin shne'amar l'sim avelet zion letet lehem pe'er tachat efar. Right, because he says you put it in the case of the tefillin, because we have this pasuk about how like will like turn for the mourners of Zion, will give them like glory in the place of oh my god, why am I blinking on the word char? There's a different word besides char. It's not, what is that? Ash. That's the word. In place of ash. V'kol hamitabel al Yerushalayim zoche b'simchata shne'amar simchot Yerushalayim v'cholei. Oh, and also the reason that it's pe'er is because tefillin is referred to with the language of pe'er, so that's why it's being called tefillin. And then we say, like, anyone who remembers Jerusalem and who mourns Jerusalem then like merits and sees joy, as we see by another pasuk. Okay, so now we're going to have one. So that's related to a custom which was in fact practiced for a number of centuries of putting ash on the foreheads of grooms. Now we'll see the origin of the practice most of us are familiar with today. So Asher, are you able to read this next bit in Brachot?
Yeah, 1 second. Let me open up on my screen so I can see it a little bit better.
Also, just for the record, there's an interesting bit that comes right before what Joel included here, where it's basically just little anecdotes of like so-and-so, like I think it's like one with Abaye and one with Rabbi Yirmiyah, where it's like Abaye was sitting before Rabbah and Rabbah saw that Abaye was too joyful. And then he said to Abaye, like, it's written like rejoice with trembling, right? That you shouldn't be too excited. And then Abaye was like, well, I have tefillin on, so don't worry. My excitement is like with Yirat Shamayim. Just interesting within the context of this all. But are you good to go, Asher?
It will be in just a moment. Hold on, I'm sorry.
Also interesting in the context there, Rabbi Yirmiyah is often somebody who we see making jokes in the Gemara. So just interesting background.
One second, I'm almost there, sorry. Okay. Marbrei de Ravina, Avad Hilula Levrei. Chazanu Rabbanan Dehavu Kavad Chi Tuba. So Ma, the son of Ravina, did a whole wedding for his son, and he saw the rabbis who were all being very, very joyful.
Too joyful.
הייתי casa דמוקרא בת 400 זוזי, ותבר כמייהו ויציבו. So he brought this like cup that was worth 400 zuzim, and he broke it, and it made them very sad. Rav Ashi avad hilul levrei chazanu lerabanu dehavu kaivat chituva. Rav Ashi made a wedding for her son. He also saw a similar thing where the sages were being too happy. Aitikasa de zugita chivarta betavar kamayo ve'atzivu. So he also brought this. I guess this is sort of similar. This is the exact same thing, except instead of being a 400 zuz cup, it's just a white glass, which I'm assuming is extremely valuable. And he broke it, and that made them sad. So the message is, when I marry off my daughters, I should have a couple of very, very expensive glasses, just in case people are enjoying themselves too much. Amaru leRabbanan Rav Chamnuna zute behilule demar brev de Rabina lishrei lanmar. So the rabbi said to Rav Chamnuna Zuti at the first one, at the Hilula of Mar, Lishrei Lanmar, Mar should sing for us. Amar Lau Vilan Demitnan, and he said to them, I guess, Oyelanu, because we're going to die. Amrile anan manani batrach, amalu hey Torah ve'he mitzvah de magnum halan. Okay, I understand the words. I have no idea what this is saying. They said Lamar should sing for us, and he said, and he sang to them, saying, "Oy ve'lan, we're all going to die." And I guess he said to them, "So
we
where's?"
Respond? They're like, "What a nice song. How do we join in on the chorus?" And he said,
"Okay." Oh boy! And he said, "Where's the Torah that's going to protect us?"
Right. The idea is that this is another case of, like, you know, they were getting too excited. They were too happy, and they were like, "Sing us a song." And he's like, "I'll sing you a song. Like, this will really bring the spirits up." So if you don't want to break a 400 zuz glass, you can always just have like a really grim song on deck.
I'll sing the blues. Okay.
There you go. And then the Tosfot comment on the bit with Rav Ashi of the Aite Casa de Gita Chivarta, Mekan Hagul Shaver Zchuchit B'Nisuin. So like there, we could see that at least by the Tosfot's time that they've established like a minhag of that, like this isn't just like in Agada, we say, we know this is a custom that we break a glass during marriages. Alan, do you want to read the Torah?
Sure. ובתוך השמחה צריך לעשות שום דבר זכר להביא לירושלים, כדכתיב, אם לא אעלה את ירושלים על ראש שמחתי. ואמר זה איפר מקלה שבראש חתנים. וכן נוהגים באשכנז בשעת ברכה. נותנים לחתן איפר בראשו במקום תפילין, דכתיב, לשום לב לציון, לתת להם פאר תחת איפר. ופאר היינו תפילין, עלמא במקום תפילין, מה נחלה? בספרד נוהגים ליתן בראשו עטרה עשויה מהזית, לפי שהזית מר זכר לב לירושלים. ונהרה ופשטה, מת וכלה שפגעו זה בזה, מעבירים את המת מלפני הכלה, ליתן לה את הדרך. All right. Right, so there's this Zecher Levi Yerushalayim that we do based on the pasuk. Rav says it's the char that you put on the head of the Chatan. That's what they do in Ashkenaz. Or say in Ashkenaz, yep, they put it on the place of the tefillin. Gives another pasuk for it. And in Sfarad, they put on his head a crown that is made of an olive leaf, because that is also very bitter. But different strokes for different folks. And also, by the way, a mate and the kala that the processions encounter each other, the kalas should take precedence.
That was I think a good translation of how we see Rashi explain the Nahar Pashte. I think the atara of the Alei Zayit is really interesting to me, because in a lot of cultures that's a symbol of like fertility or like joy or success. So like the idea of like the olive branch or olive leaf crown is like a sign of mourning is it's like an interesting connection there. I don't know if anyone still does that or not. Sarah?
I have no idea whether anyone still does that. I couldn't unsee the like crown of thorns resonances and wondered whether they stole that from like Christian neighbors who also associate that with mourning for a different reason.
It's entirely
That's a wild guess.
Wasn't the olives in non-Christian in Muslim areas? Wasn't that what he said?
Well, it was in Sfarad, but
okay.
when we were talking about Sfarad, that can also
yeah, but like
yeah.
I was thinking that it's like a maybe it was originally done as a kavod, and because they talk about the crown of gold, the people the kala would wear. Maybe it was a kavod, like the Greeks would wear laurel leaves, and then maybe they reinterpreted it to be a negative thing afterward. Because they say, well, you have to do something, to put something. So oh, that's our negative thing, actually.
Yeah. So next we have this kalbo, where the first part is him just mentioning the practice of putting the efer on the foreheads, and then starting here, v'yesh makom nimneu shelo letet efer makala b'rosh hachatanim, mipnei she'en ha'am muchsakim klal b'hanachat tefillin, v'lo yeh behem efer tachat pe'er, v'yochosheshu gam ken shema lo yeh gam ken pe'er tachat efer, nahagu la'asot zicharon acher bimkomo, שנותנים מפה שחורה על ראש החתן, והכלה, ועל זה פשט המנהג לשבר הכוס אחר שבע ברכות. Right, so he's like, some places don't put the ash there because, the whole point is that you're putting that in the place of tefillin, and if most of the community is not laying tefillin, then it loses some of that resonance. / if anything, is kind of like pointing out a bad thing, if anything like about.
I think what he might mean is that people are not wearing it all day long, so they won't be surprised that he's not wearing his tefillin.
Is that how you read with like muchsakim?
Yeah, muchsakim all the time.
But isn't he says muchsakim klal?
All right, maybe I'm wrong. I try to be generous.
I also thought that
Where does it say?
I think the practice of not wearing tefillin all the time happened like long before the kalbo. So he says that
Uh-huh.
like that like they put that because she'en ha'am muchzakim klal b'hanachat tefillin. So at least the way
Yeah,
I read it
you're
was,
probably right. I'm trying to read it differently.
little
but
bit quotes, but yeah, I read it as like if these people aren't wearing tefillin, then it both like loses the resonance, and if anything, is kind of like pointing out like a negative thing, which is not supposed to be the point of this. It's supposed to be almost kind of like I'm putting ash in place of this pe'er so that then the pe'er can kind of replace the ash, right? The idea of like I mourn so that I can then return to simcha. And if you didn't have the pe'er there in the first place, then it doesn't work in the same way. Or like also people would put like black napkins basically on their heads. But he's like
a mourning,
because
like old Russian women do when they put a black doily over their hair.
But he's like, because we don't do in a lot of these places the effer anymore, that contributed to the spread of just breaking the glass instead.
So that's two reasons for breaking the glass, two different reasons. One is because of to lower the simcha, and one, I mean, you could say it's the same thing, but one is to lower the simcha.
The same thing. It's that it's to lower the simcha. It's the reason why this would replace the other of like.
Well, why is it that they're trying to lower the simcha? Are they trying to lower the simcha because we don't want to get into kalut rosh and be too crazy? Or is it because we shouldn't be sameach too much because the temple is destroyed?
I think it's more of the latter, just because I think the idea of like not getting into like silliness or bodiness kind of encompassed within a lot of the stuff we saw in the Sif about the Misameach Chatan Kala. I think I was trying to think about like what the practical reason is, like why it's like so dafka important that we like remember Jerusalem and add a like siman of mourning during weddings. I think part of it is like weddings are a big way, like there are ways in which we gather as community. They're part of how we like constitute our collective and our community, right? They're about like building units and about what we like see our larger entity as being a part of. And I think you can see it as a time of both like intense rejoicing and also a time to like assess what we're still very much lacking and what the ways in which we're still failing, right? And so like being like we're rejoicing and also like we're mourning Jerusalem, we still have this massive loss. There are still things that we haven't accounted for. That's not supported by any of the sources Joel brought. That was purely my own drash. I mean, if any other people have other, Aaron.
So I mean, I think there's a Hava Amina that related to what you said, but I think slightly different, right? Is weddings are also about, right? The telos is often about having children and the future, and you might have a Hava Amina of like, oh, things are moving in the right direction. Like, look, all the young people are getting married, they're having kids. Like, the future of the Jewish community is very bright. Jewish continuity is working, and I think to remind us, like, oh, none of this is going. This is better than the alternative, but none of it's like going in the right direction. None of this is like really tied to or materially related to the thing we really want, which is either the temple or some sort of redemption. But also, it's just interesting in the story we saw in the Gemara, right? The Vailon the Mitnan actually seems to introduce like a third reason for not having joy that's somewhere in between the Kalut Rosh and the temple. It was just like, well, you shouldn't be so happy because like the human condition is not to be so happy, and like you should remember that like there is death.
Also, life cycle events remind you particularly starkly of death, right? Like weddings are a big marker in one's life, but also, I mean, it's like another step that you've progressed further towards the last life cycle event, which is death. But it's also something that like when you're the parents, for example, like it was like, the parents, the ones doing this in the Gemara, like when you're the parents of people getting married, then you're like further on in that cycle of like, oh, I'm already at the point where my children are getting married and they're gonna be having children, like closer to the other end of things, as it were. Okay. This next bit is just the Mate Moshe, and everyone talking about why we break the kos and saying we do it after the bracha. Who hasn't read in a bit? Andres, do you want to read the Maharil?
שאמר, שמח תשמח, רעים אהובים, הפך פניו לקרות החתן והכלה. כשגמר ברכה נתן לחתן לשתות ואחר כך לכלה. והרב החזיק בידו הכוס ואחר כך נתן את הכוס ביד החתן והפך החתן את פניו לאחוריו, ועמד נגד צפון, וזרק את הכוס אל הכותל להישבר. Okay. So they have this weird tradition of throwing the glass afterwards of drinking it into the kotel. Yeah. So,
Right. We'll see in a sec. Joel brought a source talking about what that practice looked like in Ashkenaz. That like today we think of breaking the glass and we think of a stomp, but apparently they used to like tossing it at walls, which seems dangerous to me to have glass just violently chucked in a direction. But like maybe they all were far away from where this designated stone was. Who knows? Before we get into this next section, we can just take a look at the actual in the Shulchan Aruch, the Sif Gimel, which again doesn't really, we don't see anything new from what we've already been seeing, but the Mechaber himself just says, Tzarich letet efer b'rosh hachatan bimkom hanachat tefillin, zecher le'aviyot Yerushalayim, dichtiv, asum le'avei Tzion, pe'er tachat efer. Right, so he is still referring to the practice of putting ash on one's forehead, but then the Ramah says, V'yesh mikomot shenahagu l'shaver kos acher shava brachot, v'zeu minhag noheg medinot elu she'achatan shaver akli shmevarchin alav birkat erusin. Right, so he's like, some places break a glass after the brachot, and that's what we do in these areas, that we like break the kli that was used to make birkat erusin. V'kol makom l'fi minhago. Od nohagim litanot v'en la'ayel v'din zrikat ochlin, whatever. Also, this is something that Joel is about to quote here. But he says, yeah, like again, the different strokes for different folks, different people have different ways of marking mourning, and like you do something. It doesn't have to be the Shaveret Kos, it just has to be an indication. Okay, so somebody want to read, Aaron, do you want to read the Shulchan Aruch Sif Daled here?
מת וחלה שפגעו זה בזה, מעבירים את המת מלפני הקהל, ליתן לה את הדרך.
Okay, so that's Daled another thing.
Oh, sorry. Wait.
Okay, yeah, no, I was referring to the Daled, but I can see how that was not clear. So that was the end of what Alan had read in the Torah, which is that the Kala takes precedence. And now we have this one in a different Siman that Joel brought here.
ממשיכים יין בצינורות לפני חתן כלה, והוא שיקבלנו בכלי בפי הצינור. וזורקים לפניהם כליות ואגוזים בימות החמה שאינם נמאסים, אבל לא בימות הגשמים, מפני שנמאסים, אבל לא גלוסקאות לעולם. So you should have these taps of wine running, but you should make sure that the wine is being caught in some sort of vessel. You're throwing nuts and other things, so long as it's nice outside, such that, because those things are not gross. But you definitely don't want to throw them in the rainy season, because then they're gross. I'm forgetting what glue coat are, but you never want to throw
like
those.
Cakes. I think it's that the little cakes are going to get gross no matter what. So like, don't throw cakes on the ground. The next bit, this is just the Gemara that references these, and then Rashi is like, yeah, if you're throwing like chitim, you should like make sure the place you're throwing them is clean, because those will get gross in most places.
We don't want to destroy food. You're not supposed to destroy
like the
food.
idea is like it's supposed to be like a joyful celebratory thing. It's another part of the simcha, but like it's not supposed to be like I'm just ruining a bunch of things. It's
Right,
I do think it's how people do it. Aaron?
Just to circle back to the glass for 1 second, something Alan and I were thinking about is also right, that the even if people understand what the ritual is for, the sort of experiential element of it seems to have totally been lost, right? So you go to a wedding, someone smashes the glass, everybody knows like, oh, this is about even like if you go to a non-traditional wedding, whatever, everybody's like, oh, like that's the thing about the temple, right? But they smash the glass and everybody's like, woo, amazing.
I've been at a lot of weddings where they specifically, the Masada Kedushin is like, we're gonna smash the glass, we're gonna sing Imashkachech, don't cheer, it's supposed to be sad, because they know that's like the association people have now developed of like, yay, like we're done, they got married.
a lot of times they do the mishkachech and then break the glass as kind of the end. And now that we've done that marker for the temple, we can now start to be happy. In other words,
right. I think the imeshkachech is supposed to like get people in the mood, like remind them why you're doing it. But I think a lot of friends who are Jewish but not particularly religiously involved know about the glass breaking, but don't even like. As in, I think there's a lot of people who don't even know that it's supposed to be about mourning. I think there's a lot of people who are just like, that's what Jewish weddings look like. You break a glass. Like it's one of the most depicted things in like media. If you have a Jewish wedding, that someone like smashes a glass. I think a lot of people have no idea even that it's about mourning. They're just like, yeah, you break glass. That's like part of their ritual.
I think there's also like an ayin hara idea of it, that we're taking care of the ayin hara, that any evil that should befall this couple, here's the evil. Here's the bad thing that happened. This glass got broken. And then from now on, the couple should have only good things.
Yeah.
I mean, that's my own interpretation.
No, I think that makes sense. I think the next bit here also just talking about like some people would like pour some of the wine out, and then the Taz really doesn't like that custom, and he thinks it's wasteful, and he's like, that's not what there's a little parable about like any house that doesn't have wine flowing in it like water and Siman bracha, and he's like, that's not talking about you just intentionally pouring wine on the ground, so don't do that. And then here we have a Shut Yevia Omer, where Vadia Yosef talks about whether you dafka have to break a glass cup, or whether it could also be an earthenware cup. And he brings in the idea, some of the supports for the idea that should be dafka glass are this idea that's this midrash that like a kli cheres, once it's broken, ein lo takana, whereas like a kli zchulchit can always be like melted down and like blown, essentially, that like, you know, this is like a mourning and a brokenness that has a takana, that has some form of like redemption, which I also think, again, it gets to the idea that like this avail, it's not like mourning for the sake of mourning. I feel like it's mourning for the sake of action, right? The idea of like, we're not just mourning a sad thing because it happened and it's in the past. Like we're mourning a sad thing that we think still exists with us, and because that's supposed to like, we want that to change, and we think that that can change, right? This isn't actually some eternally sad thing that's meant to stay that way. And there's also some other thing about, it's like a cute midrash about how, both about the fixing and also about how you blow on glass to create it, and Hashem blew on like the mud to create Adam. But the conclusion of the Yevia Omer is that if you want to, you could use another cup. Like you're just supposed to break something. It's just supposed to make you sad. Like if you have a nice ceramic cup that you want to break, go for it. Is the stock that's given. And then yeah, this is relating to our throwing the glass. Joel brought this bit from the interrelation between Jewish and Christian weddings, and talks about how Ashkenazi bridegrooms would cast the glass at the synagogue wall, and there would be a special stone that was designated, that was either the chuppah stein or the HaEzer stein or the trau stein. So you have like a specific place you have to like aim at on the wall to toss your glass at, which is very interesting. Apparently there aren't many of these left because a lot of the synagogues have been destroyed or rebuilt or things like that, but you can still find a few in old synagogues. Yeah, okay, well, actually we're doing decently on time. Something
Can
that...
can I say a word about that?
Yeah, go for it.
Just, I've seen some of these Trausteine, and they say, kash v'kash, kach v'kach. That's the kol sason, kol simcha, kol chatan, kol kala. And the way I heard it is the way you throw it, it was always in the north, because that's where demons come from. So there's mitzafon tipatach hara'a, and that's where the mizikin come, and they can, like the married couple.
Our bill didn't say that's fun. That was in the...
Right. So the married couple were very susceptible on their first night to all sorts of demons. And by throwing the glass there in the north, it would cut the feet of the demons when they were coming. And that was a way of protecting the married couple.
This is kind of related to what you were saying, Rav Nachum, about like the Ayin Hara aspect, right? That like this isn't just about mourning, it's actually about kind of like a pushing off like the damaging forces that would harm this new couple.
Right.
So
I think
something
these
else
things
that
I think practices tend to sort of adopt new meanings and added meanings. So I think you're right.
yeah. Something else I'm thinking about is like sorry, was somebody started to speak?
Yes, just a quick thought of Nachman and Josh's point. Right? The associations with the Beis Mikdash, with HaEzer, right? It does for me bring up an idea that, in some ways, this sort of resembles the Yom Kippur Azazel setup, right? We are making a mark, a container for all of the bad things that may happen in the relationship as a sort of ward off against the spirits, against the right, against Sitra Achra, whatever it is. Right. So like it's not only just a symbolic remembrance, but actually this sort of like remnant of what used to be a container. I just never thought of it that way before.
Yeah. I was gonna say the other thing I've been thinking about a bit is like, this is a question people also bring up around things like Tisha B'Av, whatever, but about what mourning Chorban Yerushalayim looks like in a world where like the physical entity of Jerusalem technically exists now. We still don't have a Beit Mikdash, but like, I've spoken to people before who are like, yeah, it feels weird for me to like mourn, like sit there and mourn Jerusalem while I'm sitting in Jerusalem. And I think this gets like part of my idea of it's not just dafka like an event that we're mourning, and it's not that like there's something that we still think we need to do, right? That there's something that is still broken, that is still lacking, that is still like deeply unwhole in the way that we exist, whether be it communally, be it physically. That like it's not just about like Chorban Yerushalayim in some kind of as like some isolated event, but like, yeah. And it's interesting. I know people who have different variations on like have given different speeches on this before breaking the glass, depending on what they think is most resonant.
Then you also get into the whole question. It's that there are those who say, do we really want the Beit HaMikdash again the way it was? Like there are a lot of halachas that say we don't want to go back to korbanot. It's not necessarily an ideal that we're reaching for right now. And so we do have this, and it's a whole question mark.
Right, but I think that this is definitely like both in what we were talking about how minhagim like end up developing resonance of their own that may go beyond what the initial intention was, but also the idea of like, I think this one isn't so dafka about like purely rebuilding the temple. Like we see some of these things situated within the context of mourning, but particularly the breaking the glass one, that's like, yeah, was not directly connected to like the temple. And we talk about it with like Avelut Yerushalayim. But again, I think, unlike some of our customs where we're explicitly like, and we're doing this and we would like to rebuild the temple, I think we don't have to, you can obviously read this as being like, we have no temple and that's a bummer and we would really like to have one. But I think that there are kind of other ways of reading what it is that we think is wrong and needs to be fixed.
Let me just give the rabbinic word here. We want the temple. I think the prayers that we say are all about bringing the temple, but we don't want a temple in the context of a world that has not been improved, that has some kind of tikkun olam. And when those two things happen together, then the temple will be a good addition to it. But you're right, if you look at it now, perhaps in this world, everything being the same and just being a temple there could cause trouble, could cause a lot of conflict. So we have to view it in, so when we talk about the temple being built, it's all the peripheral things that come along that need to happen along with that, all the concomitant environmental changes that need to happen, and then the temple will be sort of the chair, the pinnacle of that achievement. But it's not in isolation. So that's what we're mourning on Tisha B'Av. We're mourning that the world isn't ready for a temple.
Right, like we're mourning that the failures that led to this destruction are still existent in this world. That we haven't arrived at some perfect redeemed world. There's still what to mourn and what to work on to arrive at what actual redemption looks like. But yeah, on that note, thank you all. This was fun.
First of all, yeah, thank you very much, Lexie. Very interesting. I think that you did a really good sheer, put everything together. I think there are two aspects to this idea of I mean, you started with simcha, and not things getting too crazy, and also remembering our place in the world and the temple's failure. Let me just leave you. I think those are two aspects that go together with the limiting of the simcha. Aside from the fact that just Jews, at least Ashkenazi Jews, don't like too much simcha, if I can make that joke. But let me say one other thing that I heard recently. There are two minhagim about Sfirata Omer, or there are at least two major minhagim. One is that you start from Rosh Chodesh Iyar, and the other is that you start from Pesach. Either way, it's like 3 days. So it could happen that a person gets invited to a wedding when he's in Sfira for him. He's like not shaving, not getting a haircut, and not getting married. That's the main thing is not getting married in Sfira. So can he go if it's the other person has finished his Sfira? So Rav Moshe has a tshuva where he says there's no Isser to go to a wedding. The Isser is not to get married. So therefore, as long as so if it's not my Sfira anymore, but it's your Sfira and you're getting married, I can go to your wedding. I just thought it's a connection to what we're learning about marriage and our times. Okay, and everyone should remember that on Sunday at 8 o'clock, we have a Shir Klali from Rav Landis on Zoom.
And next Monday, we'll have Rabbi Zach Truboff. I asked him, it's good to have a man who's a Rav and he's a Talmid Chacham, just to go through the whole Mahalach of the whole process of marriage. I asked him, what did you do here? What did you do this? I gave him a whole list of things. And I think it was good to have a reviews like that. And I'll act as the moderator to keep on track.
A practical halachot.
Right.
Oh, that'll be great next week.
Lexie, Yeshkayach.
Yeshkayach.